Welcome to the discussion of the frequently made mistakes for assignment 1B. I'm going to go through all the various mistakes that I saw as I was reviewing students' code, talk about what the mistakes are, and give you a few hints on what you can do to fix the problems. We'll start first with the Palantir Manager constructor and the Palantir Manager.java file. You can see here that it's not necessary to use the type names when we say new hash map. You can simply say new hash map less than greater than, just a little bit more concise to use that Java 7 feature. You don't need to ever synchronize a constructor because it's only going to be called once in one thread of control, so there's no chance for race conditions unless you do something crazy and access global variables, for example, but we're not doing that here, so you don't need to synchronize it. Down here, please try to get in the habit of using the job 8 for each method rather than using a for each loop. It just gets you a little closer to being comfortable using Java 8 features. And down here, don't make a call to the number of Palantir method on the options singleton, but instead call the size method on the Palantir list that's passed as a parameter. Let's take a look at some of the problems with acquire. You can see this is one common problem. I was surprised by this. This is overkill. You don't need to make a synchronized map and then synchronize on it. That's kind of a belt and suspenders approach that's got way too much overhead. You can do it much simpler just by synchronizing on this and not using a synchronized map. Down here, you can see that this is actually something missing. The code here, I've left out some of the details, but there's no synchronization taking place. Likewise, in this acquire method, the student is releasing the semaphore after acquiring it. So obviously that's going to cause a problem. This is an implementation of the acquire method. A lot of people did. They tried to use the call to acquire, which is a semaphore method that can be interrupted inside a try-catch block. But this doesn't meet the spec because this acquire is supposed to not return even if the thread is interrupted. So you have to use a different acquire method that will not return. Notice this one, in fact, will get an interrupt and bad things will happen because it doesn't handle it properly. Down here is another problem I saw a couple places. Don't put the synchronized block inside the loop, move it outside the loop. Otherwise, you have too much synchronization overhead. Another common problem was people were using put and get or get and put or contains key and get and put and so on. All of those things are not as efficient as they could be. I recommend you use a for each loop over the entry set and use the methods there in order to be able to get each entry and check its value and update it and so on. It's a lot more efficient than calling into the hash map to use the hash function each time. There's a number of different mistakes people had with release. Here was a common one. People forgot to check whether the Palantir was null. If the Palantir is null, you should just basically bail out. You should not be acquiring the Palantir semaphore in release. That kind of defeats the point of release. It's supposed to be releasing things, not acquiring things. And this is another example of some code that's missing some synchronization because this is going to be full of race conditions here. Here's another version that could be more efficient or a little bit more clear. I recommend using this as a synchronizer, not the Palantir map. Once again, we have a problem where we're calling get and replace. You don't have to call them both. You can just call replace. Here was a rather curious implementation that has race conditions and is very inefficient. So it doesn't have synchronization properly, and it calls contains key. It calls get, and it calls put. You don't need to do all those things. And it also had a call to pause thread, which is very odd. You don't need to do that. And then here is yet another implementation of release that's very inefficient. You don't need to loop through the map using a for each loop or any other kind of loop. You can simply use another method that will update the map in one fell swoop very efficiently. So those were some of the common mistakes that I saw when I reviewed the code. Almost everybody had at least one of these, so please take a look at my comments on your code and let me know if you have any questions.